Okay, so continuing with the grappling arts, and we're going to look at I'm in some ways I'm going historically a little bit out of order because we talked about judo really coming from Japanese jiu-jitsu. We're going to talk about Brazilian jiu-jitsu today, which also comes from Japanese jiu-jitsu. Ultimately, we'll get to talk about Japanese jiu-jitsu, but I usually also talk about it in connection with Hapkido and Aikido. But anyway, before we do all that, we're going to talk about sumo. So, sumo is the national sport of Japan, has been for centuries. The sport is intrinsically linked to Shinto, the state religion, the imperial, even sometimes the imperial lineage itself. Sumo champions are giving the greatest esteem of any athlete in Japan. They are considered the greatest champions, the greatest fighters in the world. Throughout history, the shogun, the leader during the more military rule of Japan, before things were turned back over to the emperor, at least in name. Okay, so kind of like Britain, there's a queen, but she really doesn't do anything. I mean, she's the head of state, she's still a spokesman, but they have a parliament or whatever, right? So similarly, there's an emperor of Japan, but again, there were other people who did a lot of the ruling or policy making, if you will. But before that, when there was the shogun, who was more of a military ruler, then most of his bodyguard were, a lot of his times, his bodyguard were sumotori, right? And things. So, and the grand champions are considered the most fearsome fighters or whatever in the world. Now, most people scoff at that and go, well, that doesn't make, other than the fact they're big or whatever, but you can easily make the case, right? So, modern in the West, probably the greatest analogy, or you have UFC fighters too. Okay, hey guys, I need you. Grab you a chair or a table real fast. The greatest, sometimes you hear football players call, I'm not a fan of the metaphor, but football players are really tough, gladiators, whatever else, right? So, your offensive, defensive line in football, okay? If you have a big, heavy line in football, how heavy is that? $300 plus, like Quentin Nelson, I think is around like 325, 330. He's a freak athlete, but being heralded as one of the greatest, guards in all time already, and he's like 330, and he's big, right? Dwight Freeney, Robert Mathers, I think Mathers is something. Now he was undersized, but he was something I think like 285. He wasn't even 300 pounds. Okay, that way, right? These are big boys, right? They have shoulder pads on. Sumo and football basically line up about the exact same distance apart and both crash into one another. Full speed. 300-pound line would probably be undersized by about 100, 150 pounds in sumo. They're dwarfed. Football players have shoulder pads when they clash together. Sumo doesn't. Sumo, you're allowed to slap to the face. In football, you get your hands in your face on the offensive line, it's a 15-yard penalty. and they have helmets on. If you touch the other guy's helmet, it's a 15-yard penalty. No helmets, you can slap him in the face, that's called sumo. Everybody talks about how tough football linemen are. They're tiny, they're protected by rules and by equipment compared to sumo. And yet, I don't think anybody would want like an NFL lineman like in a three-point stance across from them, right, getting ready to tackle you or hit you. I mean, I don't think I want that, right? I don't think you would either, right? No, most people will go, no, you die, right? You know, the same people who say, oh, well, sumo's not that tough or whatever else, right? Oh, that football player kill you if they hit you. Well, what about the sumo guy? Like I said, right? He takes a lot tougher, right? So again, the case could be easily made, right, that, so you can YouTube some sumo matches, and you just listen to the clash. I mean, just when they hit, there is just smack, that clash, that impact, okay, without shoulder pads, everything else, right? So again, the case can be made, right? It was originally known as sumai, which basically was meant to struggle, and it was basically a form of military training. Now, like anything, there's the sport version, and then there was the more kind of combat martial arts version. Okay, the original form had more striking, more headbutting, and also kicking. But the kicking, even though again a lot of the sumo guys, you can see them, they can do the full splits. Most all any of them can, right? So they are incredibly flexible or whatever. The kicks were more of a stomping or stamping version, right? Sometimes in like our taekwondo forms or whatever, I talk about, oh no, what you're really doing is you're stomping down and through, right? Like to not samban or whatever. It's to stomp this person to the ground to be trampled, right? So it's not, you know, a snapping kick them upside the head. No, it's to, again, to stampede them, okay? To trample them, okay? We still see a lot of evidence of the military nature, okay? The grand champions, as they enter the ring, we'll talk about the rank in a minute a little more, but as they enter the ring, they are accompanied by a sword bearer. The ring really wasn't added until like the 1570s, okay? The ring is a clay surface with a layer of sand on top. Again, the ring was added in 1570, but it wasn't until like the 1700s that an edict was issued to forbid trampling of your opponent in the ring. The ring, you will see, has a lot of similarities to the Palestra in Greece, the Akara in India, those other places that we talked about before, right? It's sacred by a Shinto priest. There is a lot of pre-fight ceremony that goes on with the wrestlers, okay? The ring entering ceremony is like kind of like a parade. All the fighters come out by rank. The lower ranked rikishi, okay? Another synonym for sumotori or sumo wrestler is rikishi. He's old now, but I didn't really watch wrestling, professional wrestling, but there's a WWE wrestler called Rikishi. He kind of wore kind of the Mawashi loincloth, so he kind of had the sumo thing, but he had like dyed hair and stuff like that or whatever, and it kind of looked more Samoan than Japanese, kind of had more, I don't know, right? His name was Rikishi, which really just means sumo wrestler, right? But I don't think anybody knew that in WWE. He was just Rikishi. Everybody thought he was like one name, like Madonna or Prince or whoever, right? I guess, but I'm like, that just means sumo, right? Wrestler, but anyway, that was his name, right, in the WWE. Okay, but the Rikishi enter in groups. Then when you get to the higher rank, the grand is called a yokozuna. They enter individually again with their sword bearer. Yokozuna is the, sorry, that's an O. Yokozuna is the grand champions, okay? When they enter the ring, again, there's a lot of ceremony. The ring is blessed and swept by a Buddhist priest. There's a lot of ceremony. It's again the pit and the way, and the shrine is there, and again, it kind of looks like the cloister and everything else. But of course, the rikishi are wearing the mawashi, which is the kind of the big loincloth, and you can grab a hold of it and everything, right? But the idea or significance of that is basically to show that there are no weapons, right? You can't be hiding very much in those things, right? So again, it's kind of a fair fight. There's no weapons or whatever in that regard. The yokozuna has a giant white rope when they walk out. It's just kind of like a signature of the rank as well, but they don't fight in that, but they wear it out, okay? They have a special hairstyle called the Gecko leaf hairstyle that they wear. That's a big deal. You'll see again, there's a lot of pre-fight ceremony. You'll see them, right? They go, and then they make these big stomps to side to drive away evil spirits. Powder water, they'll throw unrefined salt to purify the ring. They spread their arms to demonstrate they don't have any weapons, which once again, you're wearing a mawashi, there's not a lot of place to hide it anyway, but again, they still do that, okay? So again, there is a lot of ritual. Then right before the bout starts, there is, you could almost, it's part of the match, but it's also part of the pageantry of the match. It's kind of like the pre-fight posturing ritual, stare down, whatever else, okay? So basically, the match starts when both fighters have all 4 points on the ground, right? So they get into a 3-point stance, kind of like a football player would, right here. And then when they touch the fourth, when both of them have that fourth part down, then the match starts, they launch, okay? So there's a lot of times you'll see them and they're here in the 3-point, and there's like you see UFC fighters or boxers with the pre-fight stare down, right? And staring at each other's eyes and stuff like that or whatever, and acting tough or whatever. And it makes for a good photo op for the event poster, right? So for marketing or whatever too, but there's that stare down or supposedly psychological war. So there's a lot going on for that, but then there's also a lot of timing, right? So do you make the other guy wait longer than what he's comfortable waiting before you put your hand down? Do you put your hand down early and just, I'm ready to go, let's go, right? Make rush the other guy. There's a lot of gamemanship in just that little part, because again, that whoever gets a good jump right off the line makes a big, can make a big difference or whatever. So there's a lot of gamesmanship there or whatever. The rules are pretty simple. You basically force the opponent out of the ring, or any part above their knee has to touch the ground. Okay, so basically they fall in any way, shape, or form once they come out of their stance. Okay. Sacrifice throws are legal, so you can throw them, and you can hit the ground too, as long as they hit the ground first. Okay. Like I said, I can kind of pick them up and throw them behind me, but they have to land first. Okay. And again, you try. So basically, you force them out of the ring, or you make them fall down. So it's pretty simple in the rules. Slapping to the face and throat, as we mentioned, are legal. Not close fist strikes, but you can push. It's more of a slapping push. It's not like your Batman whack slap, whatever, or no backhand, right? It's a driving, almost like a palm heel strike, but it's more pushing than like snapping. Right, but you're driving and pushing to the face to knock them off balance and stuff like that, right? Like I said, 15-yard penalty in football with a helmet on, but you can do that in sumo, okay? Another way you see the military, and it's more for ritual now, but the referees will also carry a sword. And the idea or the premise is, in olden days, if they made a bad call, right, as far as the winner goes or whatever, there wasn't instant replay back in the day or whatever, but if they made a bad call, it was expected they would commit seppuku and disembowel themselves there as a for their shame and to make up for the bad call, right? So again, they don't really do that anymore, but they still carry the sword, right? From back in the day when they did that. Okay. Tournaments last 15 days, okay? And then each fighter fights once each day. Okay, so you end up with a 15-day record. Whoever has the best record at the end of those 15 days, it's 14-1 or whatever during the tournament, then wins the tournament. And if they're tied, then you have obviously a final battle off or whatever else, right? So it's like a 15-day round robin. All ranks of sumo basically of sumotori or rikishi will fight each other. So the lowest rank might draw on any given day, might draw a yokozuna or an ozeki or whatever. The ozeki is also a champion rank. It's not the Hall of Fame grand champion rank, okay? It is very, very hard to get the rank of yokozuna, okay? Again, there are 5 classifications of rank based on tournament's performance, and you can go up and down the rank based on your performance, right? So you win a lot, then you move up in class, you win a couple tournaments, then you start to get into the champion, the ozeki ranks, you can get promoted, you can also get demoted. Yokozuna, once you get the title of yokozuna, you cannot be demoted, right, from that title cannot be taken from you. However, it's also there's a big expectation that you retire while you're still kind of on top, right? You don't keep fighting when you're a shell of yourself and losing to nobodies or whatever else, right? It's kind of that expectation. But again, yokozuna are very rare. People, again, to give you a Western analogy, people typically say baseball is the hardest Hall of Fame to get into. The Baseball Hall of Fame is the hardest baseball Hall of Fame to get into, okay? And yet, there's usually 3 or 4 inductees every year, right, into the Baseball Hall of Fame. I don't know how long the Hall of Fame has been around, okay? But, so there's hundreds of people in the Baseball Hall of Fame in the time it's been around. That's a good question. I don't know exactly how many, but right, there's still, right, in the Baseball Hall of Fame. To be throughout the centuries, hundreds of years of, now baseball is a pretty old sport. They were playing it late 1800s, early 1900s, and on. So it's over 100 years old, but it's not 500 years old, right, or whatever. Okay, so there are less than 100 yokozuna in the history of sumo. Okay, so again, it's pretty prestigious to get to that rank. One interesting guy is a guy by the name of Akibono, who's actually Hawaiian, but was nearly like, I don't even want to get, I think he was over 500 pounds. I'm pretty sure, but anyway, he was American to ultimately get yokozuna. One of the first Westerners to get that far in the sport or whatever. And bad knees, stuff like that. He kind of had to retire and stuff. But like he made a Visa commercial a while back. It's still been a while. You probably haven't seen it, but Um, like, yeah, he's, you know, the idea is like, I'm at a restaurant, I'm paying for all my food. There's like, you know, a table like that, a sushi in front of him and stuff like that, right? Then I need my Visa card or whatever and stuff like that. So but he's one name of note to sometimes you still see or hear him come up being an American. He had a rap album. I don't think it went very well, right? It's called Living Large, right? So, but you still kind of get or hear from him a little bit. Now, he was large even by sumo ranks, right? But keep in mind, you know, sumo ranks, you're 350 pounds, you could be on the small side, right, in a sumo. That's not to say that that's not to say they're just going and eating a million Whoppers or whatever else, right? It's a very regimented, specialized diet. It's high in calories or whatever, but their cholesterol might be better than mine, right? Actually, I have pretty good cholesterol, I think. So, you know, last I checked or whatever. But you know, a lot of people's diets or whatever you might not look like that, but right? Again, it's much more specialized and things like that. So they're packing on the calories, but like I said, they're not just eating fast food and everything else. It's still very regimented training. Like I said, they can do the full splits, and tradition has it, okay? And you hear about this as well, but part of their training, going back to the olden days where this might be more necessary, right, is they learned how to draw their testicles up inside their body, right, so that then they can't get kicked or stomped, right? So it's physically possible, right? Usually nowadays it's associated with traumatic injury. Like, you don't want that happening. That's a problem if it does, but it can happen, right? But that is part of their training, or at least traditionally was, right? To learn how to protect themselves, and you don't have to worry about getting kicked in the groin. You can tuck those up there. Okay? So, as I said, it's not just a bunch of fat guys wrestling. Okay, there's a lot more to it than that, and people really don't appreciate the sport. I don't necessarily appreciate a lot of the technicalities of the sport, but from a cultural standpoint and everything else, it's pretty cool. Okay, all right. So let's talk about jiu-jitsu. Okay, so jiu-jitsu is the Jiu-jitsu is the, kind of like we said, Kung Fu is a very generic term for the martial arts of China, or arguably even karate is a very generic term for the martial arts of Okinawa. Jiu-jitsu is a generic term for the grappling arts, the empty-handed arts of Japan. The name really originated often a lot later than most of the fighting systems did. There are hundreds, if not 1,000 styles of jiu-jitsu systems, like in Japan. Some of them are, they vary in popularity or breadth or diversity, or in terms of, popularity. Some are very family line, very provincial, regional, some are nationwide, right? So again, it varies very much the same way, depending on, a lot of times on, political alignments who got endorsed by a very powerful feudal lord in the Tokugawa and the shogunate era and stuff like that. Anyway, Takenouchi-ryu is one of the original schools. Kano, the founder of judo, states that the Ryu started in the 1600s, other people point to 1500s, and people had been doing this a long time before. When that really started, when did it really start to become an official martial arts system or rue? It's hard to say. A lot of times they were associated with particular temples, also, so they didn't always have to be by religious, but they were also tied to temples, okay? As I mentioned, a lot of our other martial arts systems that we are familiar with today, judo, hapkido, aikido, Brazilian jiu-jitsu, all stem from Japanese jiu-jitsu, okay? Again, we say it's the unarmed techniques, but really probably maybe a more accurate description is non-sword techniques. Because when we talk about sword or bow, then that is, those are two different arts. But then, so we said, you could do Japanese jiu-jitsu and also have other weapon systems, chain, sickle, or staff. There are other things that maybe are also incorporated today, okay? It's associated with the samurai, but in some ways it was really like the second, like tertiary or quaternary system of the samurai. In other words, just like today in the modern military, yes, they do some combatives, but they don't spend a lot of time on that, because if you're going hand to hand with someone, a lot of other things has kind of gone wrong, because we gave you a Humvee or a drone or a tank, and then we gave you a machine gun, right? If you lost your tank or whatever else. And then if you get to the point where you're hand to hand because you lost your machine gun and your sidearm, and now, right, we're down, right? Okay, so we're down the list. So again, samurai, if they're doing jiu-jitsu, yes, they practice jiu-jitsu, but really their primary weapon was the bow and arrow from long distance, or cavalry, or from on cavalry. And then you had kendo, you had your sword arts, okay? Then you had jiu-jitsu, right? But similarly, like I said, samurai, your main job was to use your weapon, cut them down, right? If you're empty-handed, then something went kind of wrong, right? But nevertheless, certainly it was part of it was to deal with the other battlefield issues that came up. That included, how to control and take prisoners, right, on the battlefield. Much like, military need, handcuffing and restraint or police officers today need handcuffing and restraint techniques and things like that. So, you have that type of stuff or whatever. Now, in Japan, kind of going along our conversation of Jutsu to Budo change, but there was also the sociological change, the societal change, where we went from the shogun to the more commercial system, and the Meiji the modernization of Japan, where the military class became less and less military in nature, right? And the samurai became, I have you in employment, but we've had peace during this the Tokugawa shogunate. We've had peace in the country for 100, 200 years. Why am I paying for this army? You got to do something. Go collect taxes. You're going to be accountants while there's no war going on, right? So you're going to be architects. You're going to do other things, right? Okay, because I'm not paying you to stand around and, do nothing but, play swords, right? When, we've got work, whatever, that's not, so there is a shift, to, like we said, some of the emphasis of, or let me back up and say, having said that, those martial arts schools, if you recall, we said, were still a vehicle to teach loyalty to your lord, your feudal lord, and instill the proper sentiments that we want a good, warrior or servant to have and stuff like that. So again, maybe we start losing some martial effectiveness, and then we start to, we get that shift from jujitsu to jutsu to budo emphasis going on. There's also, and this is it becomes a little murky. It's not as always a black and white thing, right? So as the warrior class became less relevant, now you had, and so again, if the feudal lord is not paying as much for for great martial artists, right, because they're not eating war. Well, now how am I going to make money? Well, now I'm going to start teaching. There's also a rise of a merchant class that didn't exist before. You were either a peasant farmer, right, farmer usually, or you were, again, a samurai, and there wasn't a whole lot in between the merchant class looked down upon. At the rise of the merchant class, now you had citizens with money. Well, I want to learn some martial arts. I want to learn how to defend myself, and I got money. Well, gee, I'm not getting paid anymore by my lord, or not very much, because I'm basically an accountant now, or whatever. Yeah, I'll teach you, right? So there's a shift, and so we start to see, and we can draw the distinction. There are some styles. Remember, we went back and talked about Koryu or whatever as well. They were kind of more the old school versus the kind of more new schools. Some schools stayed very pure and very more military. Some became a little more catered to civilians, right? And part of the popularity later on was because they catered to civilians and made money that way, right? It became kind of, like a little more like what we consider martial arts schools today in America and things like that, right? But they, the tactics changed. So gone were the days of battlefield war, war. Now we're talking more dueling, right, on the streets. Or civilians, they weren't really allowed to duel or carry a sword, but it was still more unarmed grappling, right, or whatever. So again, the change or emphasis in the styles, there's more civilian tactics versus the military tactics, or the dueling tactics versus, what you would do on the battlefield and things like that. So we see all these start to change in the art, okay? Jiu-jitsu overall originally was a very well-rounded martial art. You had because if you're on the battlefield, you want to be able to, you need to kick and punch. Vital point striking, you had to have wrestling, you had to have joint locking techniques. The other thing that